And then he opened the door, and we had a sort of discussion about where or where not we were going to go.
Just when the world thought the royals had healed old wounds, Princess Anne shattered the illusion with a single, unflinching truth. It was meant to be a night of celebration, a regal banquet draped in tradition and crowned by unity. The gilded chandeliers sparkled, the orchestra played softly, and the elite of Britain gathered to toast what they believed was a seamless transition into a new royal era. Queen Camilla stood proudly by King Charles's side, basking in the glow of her full title, an image crafted for stability, for peace, for order. But in one moment, all of that came undone. In front of dignitaries, family, and cameras ready to immortalize the evening, Princess Anne rose from her seat, not with a smile, not with a speech, but with words that stopped the royal clock cold. Calmly, without a hint of theatrics, she announced that Camilla was never meant to be queen. Only Queen Consort. The room, once humming with idle chatter and clinking glasses, turned to stone. Breathless, silent, suspended in disbelief. This wasn't a tabloid rumor or careless slip. It was a direct hit. Anne's voice didn't tremble. Her expression didn't flinch. And the intent behind her words was unmistakable. A warning cloaked as truth. In that single declaration, she cracked the polished surface of a carefully staged monarchy, revealing the bitter truth underneath. Guests sat frozen, unsure whether to respond or retreat. Charles, stunned, remained expressionless. But it wasn't just the shock of her words that echoed. It was their origin. Palace insiders, speaking in hushed tones after the event, confirmed what many had long suspected but dared not say aloud. Anne's words echoed Queen Elizabeth's final private wish. The late Queen, a symbol of stoic grace and constitutional strength, had made her views clear behind closed doors. Camilla, out of respect for history, out of loyalty to Diana's memory, and out of deference to the British people, was never to be crowned queen in her own right. But somewhere between the Queen's passing and Camilla's quiet ascent, the title had changed. Consort had been dropped, and a new order had begun, one not backed by tradition, but by quiet ambition. Anne, ever the silent sentinel of royal integrity, could no longer remain a passive observer. With that single act of defiance, she declared herself not just a daughter mourning her mother's absence, but a warrior defending her mother's final command. Her statement was more than personal. It was historic. It rewrote the dynamics of the monarchy in front of the very people meant to preserve it. And in doing so, Anne stepped into a role no one expected her to claim, the guardian of Queen Elizabeth's unspoken legacy. Her confrontation wasn't about titles. It was about truth. A truth too heavy to carry alone. A truth that, once spoken, could never be taken back. But this was no isolated rebellion. This battle was rooted in heartbreak that had been festering for decades. Before thrones and crowns, there was a woman in love, and the heartbreak that would redefine royal history. Long before Princess Anne ever stood as the royal family's quiet backbone, before she became the firm protector of legacy and law, she was simply a woman who fell in love. Andrew Parker Bowles was no ordinary man. He was charismatic, handsome, a decorated officer, and for a fleeting, precious moment, he made Anne feel something few royals ever experience: choice. In a life carved by duty and scripted by tradition, Anne found in Andrew a glimpse of personal freedom. It wasn't about rebellion or fantasy, it was real, powerful, and intoxicating in its simplicity. But the monarchy had other plans. The Church of England, wrapped in centuries of rigid protocol, forbade the daughter of the sovereign from marrying a Roman Catholic. The rules were clear. Anne's heart was not. As quietly as it began, their love was torn apart not by scandal or betrayal, but by the crushing weight of the institution. Andrew's faith, not his actions, became the silent executioner of their relationship. What remained was a scar Anne buried deep beneath her composed exterior. She never spoke of it publicly. She didn't cry out in defiance. She did what was expected, but the wound never healed. And then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife even deeper, Andrew Parker Bowles married someone else. Not just any woman, Camilla. For Anne, it wasn't simply heartbreak. It was humiliating. Camilla hadn't broken any rules. She hadn't schemed or betrayed, but in Anne's eyes, she had stepped directly into the life that Anne was forced to surrender. Where Anne had sacrificed love for loyalty, Camilla took the very man she had once envisioned by her side. And she did so with effortless ease, as if the years of longing and compromise had never existed. It wasn't jealousy. It was something colder, deeper. Camilla had become the living embodiment of everything Anne had been denied. She wore the comfort of marriage, the stability of companionship, the very future Anne once dared to dream of without the cost, without the sacrifice. And that more than politics, more than status, was where the resentment began. It festered quietly, never openly acknowledged, but always present. Not in words, but in the space between glances, in the silence that followed Camilla's name. Because Anne didn't just lose Andrew. She lost the one part of her life that could have ever belonged entirely to her. And she lost it to the woman who, years later, would find herself once again, intruding where Anne had already been forced to surrender. But fate wasn't finished, because Camilla wasn't just stepping into Anne's past, she was marching toward her future. When Camilla married Charles, she didn't just join the family, she reopened a wound the world never knew existed. To most of the public, the royal wedding of 2005 was the long-awaited union of two souls who had waited too long to be together. It was hailed as a second chance at love, a private romance finally finding public acceptance. But behind the carefully curated images of smiles and champagne toasts, an undercurrent of tension pulsed beneath the surface, one that could not be hidden from the keenest observers. Because while Camilla stood beside Charles, finally embraced by the crown, Princess Anne stood apart, unsmiling, unyielding, and utterly alone in her silence. For Anne, Camilla's ascent into the royal inner circle was not a fairy tale. It was a reminder that the woman who had once taken the man Anne loved had now taken something far greater. Her family, her future, her brother, the crown itself. And the world applauded it as if it were destiny fulfilled. But destiny doesn't ignore duty, and Anne had built her entire life on that sacred principle. At Charles and Camilla's wedding, royal watchers praised the poise and pageantry, but they missed the signals that spoke louder than words. Anne's rigid posture, her clipped movements, her distant gaze, each one a message. She offered no warmth, no public approval. It wasn't scandalous. It was silent. And that silence screamed. Body language experts who later dissected the footage saw what palace insiders already knew. Anne wasn't just being formal. She was drawing a line. Her disapproval was surgical, restrained, and devastatingly precise. It was a masterclass in theatrics, executed within the suffocating decorum of royal tradition. But Anne's fury wasn't theatrical. It had matured into something colder, more permanent. This wasn't about one woman stealing another's love. It was about a legacy being redefined without consent. Camilla had become the crown's new companion, its new representation of royal womanhood. But she hadn't earned it through sacrifice. She hadn't been forged in the same fire Anne had endured. Camilla had simply stepped in first into Anne's love life, now into her lineage. And while the world debated fashion choices and titles, Anne carried a burden no one else dared to speak of. Her pain wasn't past. It was a present. It lived in every forced smile, every formal encounter, every reminder that the monarchy she had spent her life protecting now bore the fingerprints of someone she had never welcomed. Camilla wasn't just a royal spouse. She was a shadow that stretched across every corner of Anne's royal existence. Yet Anne never lashed out. She didn't grant interviews. She didn't leak to the press. Her weapon was silence, and within those quiet acts of resistance, she launched a rebellion that most never saw coming. Because while Camilla celebrated her long-awaited moment in the royal spotlight, Anne was calculating something far more enduring. But Anne wasn't just grieving a past love. She was gearing up to defend a future legacy. In Queen Elizabeth's final hours, a secret was whispered that would alter the course of royal history forever. It wasn't written in ink. It wasn't part of a formal decree or bound in royal parchment. It was a quiet promise, passed not to a prime minister, nor to the heir to the throne, but to a daughter. In the stillness that surrounded the Queen's final moments, when even the walls of Buckingham Palace seemed to hold their breath, Elizabeth summoned Princess Anne. No court, no ceremony, no audience, just two women, one preparing to depart the world, the other preparing to carry its weight. And with a voice weathered by age and burden, the Queen delivered her last command. Camilla must never rise beyond the title of Queen Consort. It wasn't a request fueled by bitterness or personal grievance. It was a safeguard, a measure to preserve the fragile thread of tradition the Queen had spent her life stitching into the fabric of the monarchy. She had lived through wars, scandals, and shifting public moods. She had seen loyalty bend and break, but even in her final hours, she knew the crown could not survive if it forgot the power of its own symbolism. Camilla, no matter her public efforts or private intentions, was not meant to reign not in name, not in legacy. The title of queen belonged not to ambition, but to history, to Diana, to duty, to the trust of a nation that still bled from old wounds. Anne, even the soldier in a dress, didn't argue. She didn't cry. She listened. And with a simple nod, she accepted the vow like a sword passed from one generation to the next. That moment didn't spark anger in Anne. It carved a mission into her soul. Her confrontation with Camilla, years later, wasn't born of jealousy. It wasn't rooted in lost love. It was the execution of a sacred oath. One born not of spite, but of loyalty. Loyalty to a mother who had ruled with unshakable composure. Loyalty to the institution they both served, even when it demanded the unthinkable. From that day forward, Anne moved through public life differently. Every curtsy withheld, every icy glance at Camilla, every carefully chosen silence was no accident. They were reminders of that final conversation. Behind her stoic expression lived a storm of grief. Yes, but also purpose. Anne became more than a royal. She became the last protector of a monarch's dying wish. And yet the world misunderstood her. The tabloids painted her as cold, stubborn, resentful. But they didn't see the weight she carried. They didn't feel the gravity of a daughter guarding her mother's legacy against the erosion of time and compromise. They didn't know that what appeared to be rebellion was, in truth, the most loyal act she could ever perform. What the public saw as rebellion was, in truth, the execution of a final royal order. Some ghosts don't haunt castles, they haunt crowns, and Camilla's was never free of Diana's shadow. No matter how many public appearances she made, no matter how many charities she supported, Camilla could never escape the long, painful echo of Princess Diana's name. It followed her through every doorway she entered and every headline she hoped would be different. To millions, Camilla wasn't just a royal figure. She was the woman who stood where Diana once stood. And that wasn't a matter of protocol. It was a matter of memory. Diana had been more than a princess. She had been a symbol, a hope, a heartbreak the world had never truly healed from. And so, when Camilla finally married Charles, the public's reaction wasn't celebration, it was recoil. The marriage didn't feel like closure. It felt like betrayal. It wasn't just about a love story that had survived decades of scandal. It was about a nation still grieving, still clinging to the image of the woman they'd adored. Diana was gone, but she was everywhere. In the eyes of her sons, in the pearls she once wore, in the very architecture of public emotion. Her absence made her more powerful than ever, and Camilla had stepped directly into that void. When the palace announced that Camilla would not be called queen, but Queen Consort, it was seen as a compromise, a nod to public sentiment. But even that title, once a safe middle ground, began to stretch into dangerous territory when, in time, the consort quietly disappeared. And with it, the promise that Diana's memory would be respected. The British people didn't forget. They didn't forgive. They didn't welcome Camilla with warmth. Her image, no matter how carefully polished, remained stained with the past. For every smile she offered, there was a cold silence waiting in return. She wasn't hated because she was Camilla. She was hated because she wasn't Diana, even Queen. Elizabeth, famously discreet, never offered Camilla the warmth she had shown to others. Her approval came late, and only when royal protocol left no other option. The Queen's body language, her strategic omissions, her distance, each one spoke volumes to those watching closely. She didn't fight the marriage, but she never embraced it either. And in that vacuum of full acceptance, Camilla floated half adored, half disdained, never fully secure. Her struggle wasn't just political, it was deeply emotional. She wasn't just fighting for a seat at the table. She was fighting a ghost. And that ghost didn't just linger. It shaped everything. The royal family had long relied on public affection to maintain its sacred distance. But with Camilla, that affection was fractured. Every event she attended, every role she assumed, felt like it carried a disclaimer. She is not the woman you wanted, but she is here. The weight of that comparison was unbearable, and it never let go. And as Camilla tried to earn forgiveness, a new symbol of hope quietly stepped forward. Where Camilla clawed for acceptance, Kate Middleton was embraced with open arms, and that changed everything. She wasn't born into royalty. She didn't carry a noble title or emerge from a centuries-old bloodline. Yet, when Kate Middleton stepped into the royal spotlight, she carried something far more powerful than pedigree public love. From the very beginning, she possessed the grace the crown demanded, the poise it revered, and the compassion it had been missing. In her, the people saw a reflection of the princess they had lost. The comparison wasn't manufactured, it was instinctive. Her warmth, her quiet dignity, her devotion to family and service, they echoed the very qualities that once made Diana beloved across the globe. And the nation didn't hesitate. They welcomed her as if she'd always belonged. Unlike Camilla, Kate didn't have to rewrite a narrative. She simply lived it. When she wore Princess Diana's sapphire engagement ring, it wasn't just a symbol of continuity. It was a powerful, unspoken message. A legacy was being passed down, not by decree, but by love. Later, when Queen Elizabeth herself entrusted Kate with select pieces of her personal jewelry, the statement grew louder. These weren't just heirlooms, they were tokens of trust, a quiet acknowledgement that Kate was the future. And not just of the family, but of the very soul of the monarchy. The Queen's affection toward Kate was unmistakable. In public, her smiles were warmer, her presence more relaxed. She broke her own rules of emotional restraint when it came to Kate, offering gestures of approval rarely seen in her reign. This stark contrast to her distant, almost mechanical tolerance of Camilla did not go unnoticed. And within palace walls, where glances speak louder than proclamations, Camilla felt that difference sharpen into a silent wedge. For every door that had taken her decades to pry open, Kate was handed the keys. It wasn't personal, but it was devastating. Kate wasn't simply accepted, she was adored. In her, the nation saw a new beginning, a clean chapter untainted by scandal or sorrow. She didn't need to demand attention. She earned it, quietly, naturally, and with the effortless grace that Camilla had spent years trying to cultivate. As Kate stood beside Prince William, the vision was clear. The monarchy could still be elegant, noble and beloved without controversy, without bitterness, without ghosts. And for Camilla, that rising adoration became a quiet torment. Each public engagement that once boosted her profile now only highlighted her fading influence. Kate's every appearance, every charitable effort, every heartfelt speech chipped away at Camilla's fragile position. It was a rivalry never spoken aloud, yet deeply understood. Not between two women, but between two paths the monarchy could have taken. And the public had already chosen theirs. But the fiercest fire wasn't between Kate and Camilla, it was burning in the heart of a prince. To Prince William, Camilla was not just royalty, she was a living reminder of everything he had lost. He was only a boy when the world around him collapsed. In public, he was the picture of composure. But behind the palace gates, Prince William watched his mother crumble under the weight of betrayal, scandal, and suffocating press. He felt her isolation, heard her cries behind closed doors, and understood far too early that the fairy tale his family had sold to the world was built on lies. And at the center of that collapse, whether fairly or not, was Camilla. She wasn't just the other woman. She was the disruption that tore his childhood apart. William's love for Diana was fierce, unfiltered, and unshakable. She was his refuge in a family ruled by formality. And as her marriage to Charles unraveled, William absorbed every wound. Every tabloid headline, every whispered conversation, every tear-streaked night etched itself into his memory. So when Camilla stepped into the light, when she was no longer a secret but a fixture, William didn't protest outwardly, but inside, he built walls. High, silent, impenetrable walls. He understood the optics. He knew what was expected of him. Appear cordial, be respectful, smile, for the sake of the family, for the press, for the institution. And he did. But it was never real. Behind those polite nods was a fire that never cooled. He tolerated Camilla's presence, but never allowed her into the sacred space where his mother's memory lived. To him, Camilla's crown wasn't a symbol of status. It was an insult carved in gold. Over time, the silence between them became more telling than any public confrontation. Insiders whispered of William's coolness, his calculated distance. It wasn't hatred, it was rejection. And it only deepened as whispers began to swirl through the palace halls. Rumors surfaced unconfirmed, but potent that Camilla had passed sensitive information to certain journalists during William and Harry's most turbulent years. Whether those whispers were true or not didn't matter. What mattered was that they aligned with a fear William had never voiced, that Camilla didn't protect the family she preserved herself. No matter how the press tried to paint her as reformed, no matter how many royal duties she fulfilled, William never crossed the line into acceptance. He didn't shout. He didn't rebel. But he never truly forgave her. Not for Diana's public humiliation. Not for his mother's lonely death. Not for the broken childhood that followed. Camilla was a wound that kept reopening, polished for the cameras, but raw in his soul. And as Charles tried to balance loyalty with love, he made a decision that would change the monarchy forever. Without a single decree, King Charles stripped Camilla of the future she had fought her whole life to claim. There was no public humiliation, no royal declaration, no front-page scandal to mark the shift, just a quiet decision calculated, devastating, and irreversible. In the eyes of the public, it looked like a ceremonial promotion, but inside the palace walls, it was a strategic power play. William and Kate were officially named Prince and Princess of Wales, a title soaked in history, emotion, and expectation. It was the role that once defined Diana, and now it was being placed in the hands of a couple who symbolized redemption, modernity, and above all, hope. For the monarchy, it was a lifeline. For Camilla, it was a quiet dethroning. Charles knew exactly what he was doing. By elevating William and Kate, he wasn't just signaling the future, he was rewriting it. The center of royal gravity had shifted, and Camilla was no longer at its core. Her duties continued, but her influence began to dissolve. Slowly, silently, her presence became more ceremonial than meaningful. Behind closed doors, where real power is broken, Camilla's voice faded. The palace didn't announce her sidelining because it didn't have to. The public already saw where the wind was blowing, and more importantly, so did she. For Charles, the choice wasn't easy. Camilla had stood by him through decades of controversy and loneliness. She had weathered every insult, endured every glare. Their bond was real, but so was the cost of honoring it. The monarchy couldn't afford another rupture. Not now, not after Diana's death, not after Harry and Meghan's exodus, not with public trust dangling by a thread. Charles understood that to save the crown, he had to put it first. Above love, above loyalty, above even himself. By lifting William and Kate, Charles extended an olive branch to the people. It wasn't just a reshuffling of roles, it was an emotional recalibration. The royal family wasn't just continuing, it was evolving. William's stoic strength, Kate's effortless grace. Together, they became the face of a monarchy ready to move beyond its scandals and shadows. And in their rise, Camilla's dreams were quietly buried beneath layers of royal pragmatism. The crown she had waited so long to wear now sat heavier than ever and more hollow. There were no tantrums, no dramatic exits. Camilla knew better. She understood the language of silence, and this time it spoke directly to her. She had reached the summit only to find it occupied, not by rivals, but by inevitability. Her reign would be short, her legacy uncertain. Because in the end, titles can be granted, but not anchored. Not when the very people who once judged her now looked elsewhere for inspiration, for dignity, for royalty. But the final blow to Camilla's reign wasn't from Charles. It was from the vow Anne had never broken. She never wanted the spotlight, but Princess Anne became the silent architect of a royal reckoning. For decades, she stood just outside the frame, the one who showed up without complaint, worked without applause, and never asked for anything in return. While others courted headlines or found themselves dragged into scandal, Anne remained the crown's most loyal guardian. But behind that stoic presence was a force far more powerful than titles or thrones. A woman who had spent her life mastering restraint, only to unleash it when the monarchy needed her most. It wasn't a dramatic speech or a public rebellion that defined her. It was her resolve, unbreakable, unshaken, and deeply rooted in a promise whispered during a queen's final breath. Anne had always believed in duty, but when Queen Elizabeth entrusted her with one last wish to ensure Camilla would never rise above Queen Consort, that duty became sacred. She didn't need to shout it from the balcony. She didn't need to threaten or plead. She acted with every withheld curtsy, with every frosty glance, with every quiet moment of defiance. Anne carved a line that even the crown dared not cross. In doing so, she forced Buckingham Palace to confront a truth it had long tried to bury. Tradition cannot be rewritten by convenience, and legacy cannot be bought with public relations. Her resistance wasn't about bitterness. It was about preservation. She wasn't protecting her own pride. She was protecting the institution itself. She reminded a monarchy on the brink of irrelevance what it meant to serve, not reign. What it meant to uphold, not indulge. And in her defiance, she exposed just how fragile the balance of power had become. Because when a single woman, standing alone, can shake the foundation of a 1,000-year institution, it speaks volumes not about her rebellion, but about the palace's silence. Anne's legacy will never be chiseled in marble. It won't be written in flowery tributes or echoed through state ceremonies. It will live in the quiet recalibration of a monarchy that came dangerously close to losing its way. Her sacrifice, her restraint, her unwavering loyalty to her mother's final command reshaped the path forward. It reminded the world that some roles are not played under bright lights, but in the shadows where integrity lives, and where power dares not pretend. Now, as the next chapter of the royal family begins to unfold, a question lingers like fog over the gates of Windsor. Will the crown continue to honor Queen Elizabeth's vision, the one Anne defended with her entire soul? Or will it surrender to the very ambition it once swore to resist? Because in the House of Windsor, some truths can be silenced for decades, until one voice dares to speak them aloud. Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.